The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Cobra, nestled in the harsh landscape of eastern Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her flight suit one final time before walking toward the sleek A-10 Thunderbolt II that would be her home for the next several hours. The aircraft, nicknamed Warthog by those who flew and maintained it, sat like a patient predator on the tarmac, its distinctive twin engines mounted high above the fuselage and its fearsome GAU-8 cannon protruding from the nose like a steel tongue, ready to deliver devastating firepower. Maria had been flying combat missions for 18 months, but she still felt the familiar mixture of excitement and nervous energy that came before each sortie. At 28, she was one of only a handful of female pilots flying close air support missions in the theater, and she had learned early on that proving herself required more than just competent flying. Every mission was a chance to demonstrate that gender meant nothing when lives hung in the balance. Captain James Rodriguez, the squadron commander, approached as Maria completed her pre-flight inspection. Rodriguez was a veteran pilot with over 200 combat missions under his belt, and his weathered face bore the lines of a man who had seen too much, but continued to lead from the front. He respected Maria not because regulations required it, but because she had earned it through skill and determination that matched any pilot in his squadron. "Santos, you're taking the early patrol today," Rodriguez said, consulting his tablet. "Intelligence reports increased enemy movement in the northern sectors. Ground forces are conducting clearing operations in 3 separate areas, so stay flexible and be ready for immediate tasking." Maria nodded, understanding the implications. Close air support meant being ready to respond within minutes when ground troops found themselves in trouble. The soldiers on the ground depended on pilots like her to provide the precise firepower that could mean the difference between going home and being carried home. It was a responsibility she never took lightly. "Any specific threats I should know about?" Maria asked, pulling on her helmet and checking the communication systems. "The usual small arms fire, possible RPGs, and they've been using more IEDs lately," Rodriguez replied. "Nothing your bird can't handle, but keep your eyes open. The Taliban have been getting bolder in that sector." Maria climbed into the cockpit of her A-10, feeling the familiar comfort of the aircraft that had become an extension of herself. The Thunderbolt II was not a beautiful aircraft by conventional standards, but it was built for one purpose: to provide devastating close air support to troops in contact with the enemy. Its titanium armor could withstand significant damage, and its 30mm cannon could tear apart enemy positions with surgical precision. As she ran through her startup procedures, Maria thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in a small Texas town, she had dreamed of flying since childhood, building model airplanes and spending hours at the local airport watching aircraft take off and land. Her father, a mechanic who had served in the Navy, had encouraged her aviation interests while her mother worried about the dangers of military life. The decision to join the Air Force had not been made lightly. Maria knew that as a woman she would face challenges that her male counterparts would never encounter. Some would question her abilities, others would assume she had received special treatment, and a few would simply never accept that a woman belonged in a combat cockpit. But Maria had never been one to back down from a challenge, and the opportunity to serve her country while pursuing her passion for flying had been too compelling to resist. Flight training had been grueling, both physically and mentally. The A-10 was a demanding aircraft that required strength, skill, and split-second decision-making abilities. Maria had excelled in every phase of training, earning the respect of her instructors and fellow pilots through her dedication and natural flying ability. When she finally received her wings and assignment to a combat squadron, she knew she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The ground crew finished their final checks, and Maria received clearance from the tower. The twin engines of the A-10 spooled up with their characteristic whine, and Maria felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with each takeoff. She released the brakes and felt the aircraft accelerate down the runway, lifting off into the crystal-clear Afghan sky. Once airborne, Maria checked in with the Airborne Warning and Control System aircraft that coordinated air operations across the region. The AWACS controller provided her with an update on friendly force positions and potential target areas, information that would be crucial if she received a call for close air support. "Hawkeye 2-1, this is Warrior 3-6, Maria called over the radio. "On station and ready for tasking." "Copy that, Warrior 3-6, came the professional voice of the AWACS controller. "No immediate tasking at this time. Maintain patrol pattern and stand by for updates." Maria settled into a comfortable orbit pattern over the designated area, using the time to familiarize herself with the terrain below. Afghanistan was a country of stunning beauty and harsh contrasts, with snow-capped mountains giving way to desert valleys and ancient villages that seemed unchanged by centuries of conflict. From her altitude, she could see the roads and paths that coalition forces used to move supplies and personnel, as well as the countless hiding spots that enemy fighters used to plan and launch attacks. The radio crackled with routine communications between ground units and their command posts. Maria listened with half her attention, ready to respond if her call sign was mentioned. The other half of her mind focused on the systematic scan of the ground below, looking for any signs of enemy activity that might threaten friendly forces. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Thompson was leading a convoy of 3 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles along a dusty road 20 miles to the north. Thompson was a career infantry officer who had deployed to Afghanistan 4 times, and he knew the dangers that lurked around every corner in this unforgiving landscape. His unit was conducting a routine patrol to establish a presence in an area where intelligence reports suggested increased enemy activity. Thompson's radio operator, Sergeant First Class David Kim, monitored multiple frequencies while keeping watch for potential threats. Kim had been with Thompson for 2 deployments and had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when something was not right. As the convoy rounded a bend in the road, Kim felt that familiar tightness in his stomach that had kept him alive through dozens of patrols. "Sir, this feels wrong," Kim said quietly to Thompson. "Too quiet for this time of day, and I don't see any locals around." Thompson nodded, trusting Kim's instincts completely. In Afghanistan, the absence of civilians often meant that locals had been warned to stay away from an area where an attack was planned. Thompson ordered the convoy to halt while his soldiers scanned the surrounding area with binoculars and thermal imaging equipment. The road ahead passed through a narrow valley with rocky hills on both sides. Perfect terrain for an ambush. Thompson had no choice but to continue forward, as the mission required his unit to establish checkpoints at 2 villages further ahead. He ordered his drivers to increase speed and maintain maximum spacing between vehicles as they entered the danger area. Meanwhile, Maria continued her patrol, unaware that events were already in motion that would soon test every skill she had learned in training and combat. The morning sun climbed higher into the sky, and the heat began to build in the cockpit despite the air conditioning system. Maria adjusted her seat position and checked her fuel status, calculating how much longer she could remain on station before needing to return to base for refueling. In a hidden position overlooking the road, Mullah Akhtar Rahman watched the American convoy through a pair of binoculars. Rahman was a mid-level Taliban commander who had been planning this attack for weeks, positioning his fighters in carefully chosen locations that would give them maximum advantage when the fighting began. He had 20 men armed with AK-47 rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and improvised explosive devices that had been placed along the route. Rahman knew that American convoys were usually accompanied by air support, either helicopters or fixed-wing aircraft that could respond quickly to an attack. His plan accounted for this possibility by positioning some of his fighters in locations where they could engage any aircraft that attempted to provide close air support. Rahman had learned through bitter experience that success against American forces required careful planning and the ability to break contact quickly before overwhelming firepower could be brought to bear. Thompson's convoy entered the valley, and every soldier felt the tension that came with moving through terrain that favored the enemy. The lead vehicle's commander swept the hillsides with his machine gun, ready to engage any threats that appeared. The second vehicle carried Thompson and his command team, while the third vehicle brought up the rear with additional firepower and medical supplies. The first explosion shattered the morning silence as an IED detonated under the lead vehicle. The blast lifted the front of the MRAP and sent shockwaves through the valley that could be felt miles away. Before the debris had settled, Rahman's fighters opened fire from multiple positions on the hillsides, their muzzle flashes winking like deadly fireflies in the shadows of the rocks. Thompson's radio erupted with reports from his vehicle commanders as they maneuvered to respond to the ambush. The lead vehicle had suffered significant damage, but remained mobile, a testament to the engineering that had gone into protecting soldiers from roadside bombs. The crew was shaken but uninjured, and they quickly moved their vehicle to a defensive position while returning fire at the enemy positions. "Contact, contact, contact!" Thompson's radio operator called over the command frequency. "Ambush on route Falcon, grid 41R QR 123456, taking effective fire from multiple positions. Request immediate close air support." The call for help went out over multiple frequencies, reaching the Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Cobra and the AWACS aircraft coordinating air operations across the region. Within seconds, controllers were working to identify available aircraft that could respond to the troops in contact. Maria heard the emergency call come over her radio and felt her heart rate immediately increase. This was why she was here, circling in the Afghan sky with a full load of ammunition and fuel. Somewhere below, American soldiers were fighting for their lives, and she was in position to help them. "Warrior 3-6, this is Bone Crusher 6, came Thompson's voice over the radio. "We are in heavy contact and need immediate air support. How soon can you be on station?" Maria checked her navigation system and calculated the distance to the reported grid coordinates. She was less than 5 minutes away at maximum speed, close enough to potentially make a difference in what sounded like a developing firefight. "Bone Crusher 6, this is Warrior 3-6. Maria responded as she banked her aircraft toward the reported position. "I am 5 minutes out with full ordnance. Send me your location and target information." As Maria pushed her throttles forward and felt the A-10 accelerate toward the sound of gunfire, she had no idea that she was about to become part of a story that would be told and retold throughout the military for years to come. All she knew was that soldiers were in trouble, and she had the training and equipment to help them survive. The Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Cobra buzzed with controlled urgency as multiple radio frequencies crackled with reports from the ambushed convoy. Major General Patricia Hayes, the base commander, stood behind the watch officers as they coordinated the response to what was rapidly becoming a significant engagement. Hayes was a career logistics officer who had worked her way up through the ranks during 25 years of service, but she understood combat operations well enough to recognize when her people were in serious trouble. "Sir, we have confirmation of troops in contact en route Falcon," reported Captain Sarah Mitchell, the duty officer. "Bone Crusher 6 is reporting effective fire from multiple positions and requesting immediate close air support. They've got one vehicle damaged but mobile, no casualties reported yet." Hayes nodded grimly. Route Falcon was a known danger area, but it was also a critical supply line that had to be kept open. Losing a convoy there would not only cost lives, but would also give the enemy a propaganda victory and potentially valuable military equipment. "What air assets do we have available?" Hayes asked. Mitchell consulted her status board, which displayed the real-time location and availability of all aircraft in the area. "We have Warrior 3-6 on station approximately 5 minutes from the contact area." A-10, full ordnance load. Pilot is Santos. Hayes paused for a moment, processing the information. She knew Santos by reputation. The young pilot had distinguished herself in several previous engagements and had the respect of the entire squadron. The fact that Santos was already airborne and close to the action was extremely fortunate for the soldiers on the ground. "Get me Captain Rodriguez on the line," Hayes ordered. "I want to make sure we're coordinating this properly." Meanwhile, the battle in the valley was intensifying rapidly. Thompson's convoy had managed to establish a defensive perimeter using their vehicles as cover, but Rahman's fighters held the high ground and were pouring effective fire down on the Americans. The Taliban commander had positioned his men well, with overlapping fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous for the convoy. Sergeant First Class Kim worked frantically with his radio equipment, trying to maintain communication with higher headquarters while also coordinating fire support from the convoy's heavy weapons. The 50-caliber machine guns mounted on each MRAP were returning fire at the enemy positions, but the rocky terrain provided excellent cover for Rahman's fighters. "Bone Crusher 6, this is Warrior 3-6. Maria's voice came over the radio as she approached the battle area. "I have visual on your position. I see muzzle flashes on the ridgeline to your north and east. Can you mark your positions for me?" Thompson grabbed the radio handset from Kim. "Warrior 3-6, we are 3 vehicles in a defensive triangle on the road. We have IR strobes marking our positions. Bad guys are in the rocks on both sides of the valley, estimated 20 to 30 personnel with small arms and RPGs. Maria banked her A-10 into a left turn that would give her a clear view of the engagement area. Through her targeting pod, she could see the convoy vehicles clearly marked with infrared strobes that were invisible to the naked eye, but showed up brilliantly on her sensors. The enemy positions were harder to identify, marked only by the brief flashes of muzzle blasts and the occasional smoke trail from an RPG. "Bone Crusher 6, I have your position marked," Maria replied. "I'm going to make a show of force pass first to see if that breaks up their attack. Stand by." Maria pushed the nose of her A-10 down into a shallow dive, aiming directly at the ridge line where most of the enemy fire was coming from. The twin engines screamed as she accelerated toward the target, and at the last moment she pulled up sharply, the aircraft passing just a few hundred feet above the rocky positions where Rahman's fighters were hiding. The psychological effect of a low-flying attack aircraft was often enough to break up an enemy attack, but Rahman had prepared his men for this possibility. Rather than fleeing, the Taliban fighters continued their attack, some even turning their weapons skyward to engage the aircraft as it passed overhead. "Negative effect on the show of force," Maria reported as she climbed back to a safe altitude. "They're staying in position and continuing to engage. I'm going to need to use ordnance." Thompson felt a mixture of relief and concern. Relief, because he knew that close air support could tip the balance of the firefight decisively in favor of his convoy, but concern because employing weapons from an aircraft always carried the risk of friendly fire incidents. The margin for error was measured in meters, and a mistake could be catastrophic. "Warrior 3-6, we are taking heavy fire and need you to engage the enemy positions," Thompson called over the radio. "Closest bad guys are approximately 200 meters north of our position on the ridgeline." Maria acknowledged the transmission and began setting up for her first gun run. The GAU-8 cannon that gave the A-10 its primary identity was a fearsome weapon system capable of firing 3,900 rounds per minute of 30mm depleted uranium ammunition. Each round was designed to penetrate armored vehicles, making them devastatingly effective against personnel and light fortifications. At the Tactical Operations Center, Captain Rodriguez had arrived and was monitoring the radio transmissions from the engagement. Hayes stood beside him, listening to the professional calm in Maria's voice as she prepared to engage the enemy positions. "Rodriguez, that's one of your pilots out there, isn't it?" Hayes asked. "Yes, ma'am. Santos is one of my best pilots. If anyone can sort this out, she can," Rodriguez replied with confidence. A young lieutenant who had been monitoring the radio frequencies turned to Hayes with a puzzled expression. "Ma'am, I've got Colonel Adams from the 2nd Brigade on the line. He's asking about the air support situation for Bone Crusher 6. Hayes took the handset, knowing that Adams was Thompson's brigade commander and would be personally concerned about his soldiers' welfare. "Adams, this is Hayes. We have close air support on station and engaging the enemy positions now." "Patricia, I appreciate the quick response," Adams replied. "Can you tell me what kind of air support we've got up there? My boys are in a real fight." Before Hayes could respond, Rodriguez stepped forward. Colonel Adams was known throughout the division as an old-school infantry officer who had strong opinions about women in combat roles. Rodriguez had heard Adams express doubts about female pilots in previous conversations, suggesting that they might not be aggressive enough for close air support missions. "General, Colonel Adams wants to know what kind of air support we have for his people," Hayes said to Rodriguez. Rodriguez keyed the handset with a slight smile. "Tell him we've got an A-10 with a full weapons load and an excellent pilot. She's already up there." There was a long pause on the radio before Adams responded. "She?" Meanwhile, Maria was lining up for her first attack run on the enemy positions. Through her targeting pod, she could see individual fighters moving among the rocks, trying to maintain their attack on the convoy, while also seeking cover from the approaching aircraft. Maria selected her aiming point carefully, focusing on a cluster of muzzle flashes that seemed to be the source of the most effective fire against Thompson's position. "Bone Crusher 6, Warrior 3-6 is inbound from the south with guns," Maria called over the radio. "Keep your heads down." The distinctive sound of the GAU-8 cannon was unlike anything else in warfare. The rate of fire was so rapid that individual shots blended into a deep, buzzing roar that lasted only a few seconds, but delivered devastating firepower to the target area. Maria held the trigger for a 2-second burst, sending nearly 130 rounds of 30mm ammunition into the rocky positions where Rahman's fighters were hiding. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The enemy fire from that section of the ridgeline ceased completely as the surviving fighters scrambled for better cover. The depleted uranium rounds had shattered rocks and created a cloud of dust and debris that obscured the entire area. "Good hits! Good hits!" Thompson called over the radio. "You got them!" "Fire has stopped from the North Ridge." But Rahman had not survived several years of fighting American forces by being easily discouraged. As Maria climbed away from her first gun run, he ordered his remaining fighters to shift positions and continue the attack from different locations. The Taliban commander knew that the aircraft would have to return to base eventually, and if he could maintain pressure on the convoy until then, he might still achieve his objectives. "Warrior 3-6, we're still taking fire from the east side of the valley," Thompson reported. "Multiple positions in the rocks about 300 meters from our location." Maria banked her aircraft around for another attack run, this time approaching from a different direction to engage the new threat. She could see muzzle flashes winking among the boulders on the eastern ridge, and she carefully selected her target area to avoid any possibility of hitting friendly forces. Back at the Tactical Operations Center, Colonel Adams was trying to process the information he had received from Rodriguez. Adams had commanded infantry units for over 20 years, and while he had worked with female soldiers in support roles, he had never been in a situation where his soldiers' lives depended on a female pilot's combat skills. "Rodriguez, I need to know, is this pilot experienced? Has she seen combat before?" Adams asked over the radio. Rodriguez looked at Hayes, who nodded for him to respond honestly. "Colonel, Santos has flown over 40 combat missions and has multiple confirmed enemy kills. She's been decorated for valor and is one of our most reliable pilots. Your people are in excellent hands." As if to emphasize Rodriguez's point, Maria's voice came over the radio frequency. "Bone Crusher 6, Warrior 3-6 is inbound from the west with guns. Target is the cluster of rocks 300 meters east of your position. This time, Maria's gun run was even more precise than the first. She had identified a natural choke point where several enemy fighters had taken cover, and her burst of cannon fire sent rounds ricocheting off the rocks in all directions. The psychological effect of being under attack by aircraft was as important as the physical damage, and Maria could see fighters abandoning their positions and running for better cover. Thompson watched the enemy fire slacken noticeably after Maria's second gun run. The Taliban fighters were still present in the area, but they were no longer maintaining their coordinated attack on the convoy. Some were attempting to withdraw to more distant positions, while others were simply trying to find cover that would protect them from the deadly accurate fire from above. "Warrior 3-6, you're doing great work up there," Thompson called over the radio. "Enemy fire has decreased significantly. We can see some of them trying to break contact and withdraw to the north." Maria had been trained to recognize the signs that an enemy force was beginning to withdraw, and she knew that this was the critical moment in the engagement. If the Taliban fighters were allowed to escape cleanly, they would regroup and attack another convoy on another day. Her mission was not just to protect Thompson's people, but to eliminate the threat entirely. "Bone Crusher 6, I'm going to try to cut off their withdrawal routes," Maria replied. "Can you identify any escape routes they might be using?" Kim, who had been studying the terrain through binoculars, keyed the radio. "Warrior 3-6, this is Bone Crusher 6's RTO. I can see a group of approximately 8 to 10 personnel moving north through a wadi about 600 meters from our position. They appear to be carrying weapons and equipment." Maria located the dry stream bed that Kim was describing and could see the movement he had reported. The withdrawing fighters were using the natural depression in the terrain as concealment, but they were exposed from above. This was exactly the kind of target that the A-10 had been designed to engage. "I have visual on the personnel in the wadi," Maria confirmed. "I'm going to engage with guns. Stand by." Colonel Adams listened to the radio traffic with growing amazement. The pilot, calling herself Warrior 3-6, was demonstrating exactly the kind of aggressive, precise combat flying that close air support required. Her target identification was perfect, her communication was professional and clear, and most importantly, she was getting results that were saving the lives of his soldiers. "Rodriguez," Adams called over the radio, "I owe you and your pilot an apology. Whoever she is, she knows her business." Rodriguez smiled as he replied, "No apology necessary, sir. Santos is just doing what she was trained to do." Maria lined up for what she hoped would be the decisive gun run of the engagement. The withdrawing Taliban fighters were strung out along the wadi in a formation that made them vulnerable to attack from above. But the shot required precise timing and accuracy to avoid hitting any friendly forces that might be moving in the area. She carefully checked her targeting pod display one more time, confirming that no coalition forces were anywhere near her intended target area. "Bone Crusher 6, Warrior 3-6 is inbound with guns on the personnel in the wadi," Maria called over the radio. "Final attack run. After this pass, I'll need to head back to base for fuel and ammunition." Thompson acknowledged the transmission and ordered his soldiers to maintain their defensive positions until the threat was completely neutralized. The convoy had been under attack for nearly 30 minutes, an eternity in combat. But the tide had clearly turned in their favor thanks to the devastating accurate fire from above. Maria pushed her aircraft into a shallow dive, lining up the GAU-8 cannon on the moving figures below. At precisely the right moment, she squeezed the trigger and felt the familiar vibration as the massive gun sent a stream of 30mm rounds into the narrow valley. The results were immediate and final. The enemy movement in the wadi ceased completely. "That's a direct hit," Kim called over the radio as he watched through his binoculars. "No movement visible in the target area." Rahman, who had been leading the withdrawal, realized that his carefully planned ambush had become a disaster. Half of his fighters were dead or wounded, and the others were scattered across the rocky terrain seeking whatever cover they could find. The American aircraft had proven far more effective than he had anticipated, and the convoy below was now organizing to pursue any survivors. Maria climbed back to a safe altitude and began a systematic scan of the entire engagement area, looking for any remaining threats that might endanger the convoy. Through her targeting pod, she could see several individual fighters still hiding among the rocks, but they appeared to be focused on escape rather than continuing the attack. "Bone Crusher 6, this is Warrior 3-6, Maria called over the radio. "The immediate threat appears to be neutralized. I can see scattered personnel in the area, but they are not exhibiting hostile behavior. I have about 15 minutes of fuel remaining before I need to return to base." Thompson felt the tension begin to drain from his body as he realized that the worst was over. His convoy had survived the ambush with no casualties, thanks primarily to the skill and courage of the pilot who had arrived at exactly the right moment. He had worked with close air support many times during his deployments, but he had never seen such precise and effective firing under difficult conditions. "Warrior 3-6, this is Bone Crusher 6, Thompson replied. "Outstanding work up there. You saved our lives today. We're going to need about 10 more minutes to check our vehicles and treat any wounded. Then we'll be ready to continue our mission." The Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Cobra had been monitoring the engagement through multiple radio frequencies and sensor feeds. Major General Hayes watched the real-time video from Maria's targeting pod as the young pilot systematically dismantled the enemy ambush with textbook precision. Hayes had seen many close air support missions during her career, and this was among the most professionally executed she had ever witnessed. "Rodriguez, your pilot performed exceptionally well out there," Hayes said to the squadron commander. "I want a full after-action report on this engagement, and I want Santos to know that her performance was noted at the highest levels." Rodriguez nodded with pride. He had known from the beginning that Maria had the potential to be an outstanding combat pilot, but seeing her perform under pressure had confirmed his assessment completely. More importantly, her performance had demonstrated to skeptics like Colonel Adams that gender was irrelevant when it came to combat effectiveness. Colonel Adams remained on the radio frequency, listening to the final stages of the engagement with a mixture of relief and admiration. His soldiers were safe, the mission could continue, and he had learned an important lesson about the capabilities of the pilots who provided close air support to his units. "Hayes, I want to meet this pilot when she gets back to base," Adams said over the radio. "I owe her a personal thank you, and I think my soldiers would like to know who saved their lives today." Maria began her return flight to Forward Operating Base Cobra with a sense of satisfaction that came from a mission well executed. She had responded quickly to a troops-in-contact situation, eliminated a significant enemy threat, and protected American soldiers from harm. It was exactly why she had joined the Air Force and chosen to fly combat missions in Afghanistan. During the 20-minute flight back to base, Maria reflected on the engagement and mentally reviewed her performance for the after-action report that would be required. Every combat mission was analyzed in detail to identify lessons learned and areas for improvement, and Maria was always looking for ways to enhance her effectiveness as a close air support pilot. As her A-10 approached the landing pattern at Cobra, Maria could see ground crews already positioning themselves to service her aircraft for the next mission. The war in Afghanistan was a 24-hour operation, and there was always another convoy that might need protection, another patrol that could encounter enemy forces, another situation where precise firepower delivered from above could make the difference between life and death. Maria landed smoothly and taxied to her assigned parking spot, where her crew chief was waiting to begin the post-flight inspection. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, no relation to the squadron commander, had been maintaining aircraft for 12 years and had worked on Maria's A-10 for the past 6 months. He took personal pride in keeping his aircraft in perfect condition, knowing that mechanical reliability could be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "How did she fly today, ma'am?" Rodriguez asked, as Maria climbed down from the cockpit. "Like a dream, Mike," Maria replied with a smile. "Smooth as silk, and the gun system performed flawlessly. I put about 200 rounds downrange, and everyone went exactly where I aimed it." Rodriguez nodded with satisfaction. Maintaining the GAU-8 cannon system was one of the most challenging aspects of A-10 maintenance, and hearing that it had performed perfectly under combat conditions was the highest compliment he could receive. Word of the successful mission spread quickly through the base. In the close-knit community of a forward operating base, news traveled fast, especially when it involved a dramatic rescue of friendly forces. By the time Maria completed her post-flight procedures and headed to the squadron building for her debriefing, dozens of people had heard about the female pilot who had single-handedly broken up a major Taliban ambush. Captain Rodriguez was waiting for Maria in the Squadron Operations Center, along with Major General Hayes and several other senior officers. The presence of the base commander at a routine mission debriefing was unusual, and Maria felt a flutter of nervousness as she entered the room. "Santos, excellent work out there today," Rodriguez said as Maria took a seat at the briefing table. "General Hayes wanted to personally hear your account of the mission." Maria straightened in her chair and began her report in the precise professional manner that had been drilled into her during training. She described the initial call for help, her response time, the tactical situation she encountered, and the specific actions she took to neutralize the threat. Her account was factual and understated, focusing on procedures and results rather than the drama of the situation. Hayes listened intently to Maria's report, occasionally asking questions about specific details or requesting clarification about tactical decisions. The general had commanded at multiple levels during her career and understood the complexities of close air support operations. She was particularly impressed by Maria's ability to maintain situational awareness and make split-second decisions under pressure. "Santos, how many combat missions have you flown since arriving in theater?" Hayes asked. "This was my 43rd combat mission, ma'am," Maria replied. 37 close air support sorties and 6 armed reconnaissance missions." Hayes nodded, making notes on her tablet. 43 missions was a significant number for a pilot who had been in country for less than 2 years, and it indicated that Maria had been trusted with challenging assignments from the beginning of her deployment. "Tell me about your target identification process during today's engagement," Hayes continued. "How did you ensure that you were engaging enemy forces and not friendlies?" Maria described her systematic approach to target identification, emphasizing the multiple confirmation steps she used before employing weapons. She explained how she coordinated with the ground forces to mark their positions, how she used her targeting pod to visually identify enemy activity, and how she selected specific aim points that would minimize the risk of friendly fire incidents. The debriefing continued for nearly an hour as Hayes and the other officers explored every aspect of the mission. Maria answered each question with the calm professionalism that had made her successful as a combat pilot, but internally she was beginning to realize that this mission was being treated as something more than a routine close air support call. As the formal debriefing concluded, Hayes stood and addressed Maria directly. "Santos, I want you to know that your performance today was exceptional. You responded quickly to a troops-in-contact situation, made excellent tactical decisions under pressure, and probably saved the lives of multiple soldiers. That kind of performance reflects well on you, your squadron, and this base." "Thank you, ma'am," Maria replied. "I was just doing my job." Hayes smiled at the modest response. "Sometimes doing your job exceptionally well is worthy of recognition, Santos. I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross for your actions today." Maria felt a surge of emotion at the unexpected announcement. The Distinguished Flying Cross was one of the highest decorations that could be awarded for aerial achievement, and receiving it would represent the pinnacle of her military career to that point. Colonel Adams arrived at the base later that evening, having completed the convoy mission, and returned his soldiers safely to their forward operating base. True to his word, he had requested a meeting with the pilot who had provided close air support to his troops, and Rodriguez had arranged for him to meet Maria in the squadron ready room. Adams was a large man with graying hair and the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades in the infantry. He had commanded soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan and had developed strong opinions about courage and competence based on his experiences in combat. As he entered the ready room where Maria was waiting, Adams was struck by how young she appeared. "Warrior 3-6, I presume?" Adams said as he approached Maria. "Yes, sir. Staff Sergeant Santos," Maria replied, standing at attention. Adams extended his hand with a genuine smile. "Colonel Adams, 2nd Brigade, I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for my soldiers today. That was some of the finest flying I've ever seen." Maria shook the colonel's hand, feeling the firm grip of a man who was accustomed to physical work. "Thank you, sir. I'm glad we were able to help." Adams sat down across from Maria and leaned forward intently. "Santos, I need to be honest with you. When Captain Rodriguez told me that our air support was a female pilot, I had my doubts. I've been in the infantry for 23 years, and I've seen a lot of combat. I wasn't sure if a woman would have the aggressiveness and precision that close air support requires." Maria listened without responding, unsure where the conversation was heading. Adams continued, "What you did today proved me wrong completely. Your flying was aggressive when it needed to be, precise when precision mattered, and professional throughout the entire engagement. You saved the lives of my soldiers, and you did it better than most male pilots I've worked with." The colonel's words carried significant weight coming from someone with his experience and reputation. Maria felt a sense of validation that went beyond the formal recognition she had received from General Hayes. "Sir, I appreciate your confidence," Maria replied. "Gender doesn't matter when people's lives are on the line. What matters is training, skill, and dedication to the mission." Adams nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right, Sergeant. And you've got all three in abundance." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes as Adams described the engagement from the ground perspective and asked Maria about her training and background. By the time the colonel left, Maria felt that she had not only completed a successful mission, but had also helped change the mind of someone who would influence the careers of many other military women in the future. 3 weeks later, Maria stood in formation on the parade ground at Forward Operating Base Cobra as Major General Hayes pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross to her uniform. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of personnel from across the base, including Colonel Adams and the soldiers from Bone Crusher 6, who had been saved during the ambush. As Hayes read the citation describing Maria's heroic actions, Thompson and his soldiers stood proudly in the audience, knowing that they owed their lives to the skill and courage of the pilot being honored. The citation specifically mentioned Maria's extraordinary heroism and exceptional flying skill under combat conditions, and noted that her actions had directly resulted in the preservation of American lives and the defeat of enemy forces. After the ceremony, Maria was surrounded by well-wishers and congratulated by dozens of fellow service members. The story of the female pilot who had broken up the Taliban ambush had spread throughout the military community in Afghanistan, and Maria had become something of a celebrity among aviators and ground forces alike. Captain Rodriguez approached Maria as the crowd began to disperse. "Santos, I've got some news that I think you'll find interesting," he said with a grin. "I just received word that you've been selected for promotion to technical sergeant, and you're being transferred to a new assignment as a flight instructor." Maria felt another surge of emotion at the unexpected news. Being selected as a flight instructor was one of the highest honors that could be bestowed on a military pilot, and it meant that she would be responsible for training the next generation of close air support pilots. "Sir, that's incredible news," Maria replied. "I'm honored to be selected." Rodriguez nodded with pride. The Air Force needs instructors who can teach not just the technical aspects of flying, but also the mental toughness and decision-making skills that combat requires. Your performance in Afghanistan has proven that you possess all of those qualities. As Maria walked back to her quarters that evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small town in Texas to the skies over Afghanistan, she had faced challenges and overcome obstacles that had tested every aspect of her character and ability. The distinguished flying cross on her uniform was a symbol of her achievement, but more importantly, it represented the opportunity she had been given to serve her country and make a difference in the lives of others. The story of Staff Sergeant Maria Santos and her heroic actions during the ambush on Route Falcon would be told and retold throughout the military for years to come. It became an example used in training courses to illustrate the importance of quick decision-making under pressure, and it was cited in discussions about the role of women in combat positions. But for Maria, the most important outcome was not the recognition or the decorations. It was the knowledge that when soldiers called for help, she had been ready to answer that call, and she had performed her duty with the skill and courage that the situation demanded. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not whether the pilot providing life-saving support was male or female, but whether they possessed the training, dedication, and courage to get the job done when lives hung in the balance.